Hey everyone, my name is Chris A, and today I want to talk about music and memory, a profound relationship. This video is going to be a bit of a departure from my previous videos, but as you'll find out, this essay is very close to my heart. I'm dedicating this video to my mother, who would have turned 60 today. When I was a kid, I had a photographic memory, or at least very nearly photographic, and it meant I was always good at taking tests. I didn't even need to necessarily learn all the material for a test. I could just sit there and think of an exact spot in my textbook or notebook and read it in my head. In elementary school, this was obviously a very useful skill in social studies, science, English, subjects that required rote memorization of facts and figures, dates and places. But it didn't help me much in math. Sure, there are multiplication tables to be memorized, but referencing a 12 by 12 multiplication table in my head for every single problem wasn't going to cut it. So my mother and I would practice with flashcards. We practiced just about every night, and I was getting quite good. But I remember there was one night where I just could not remember what 6 times 8 is. It's 48, I know that now. I remember sitting in my family room, stage left on the couch. When I'm sitting on a couch or bed, I find it useful to describe my orientation as if I'm standing on stage. So I'm stage left, my mother was stage right, we're both facing center. What I remember most is that I felt frustrated. I know I was frustrated in the moment, but when I recall that memory, I don't feel frustrated at all. I can't even make myself feel frustrated about not being able to feel frustrated. Now, in my old age, my memory isn't what it used to be. I struggle to remember specific statistics from a news story I read this morning. Even so, I have a decent recall of personal events. I remember the summer of 2016, jogging down country roads, listening to Chance the Rapper's coloring book. And the summer before that, I remember sitting at my friend's counter, eating vegetarian tacos and listening to Miguel's Wild Heart. I can remember my freshman year, leaving class with Blueprint 3 on my iPod. When I was a senior in high school, I can remember blasting The Glory by Kanye West in my dad's car on my way to upright bass lessons. There are memories from middle school of lounging around in my bedroom, listening to Neutral Milk Hotel on the record player. I could go on. But what's really unique about these memories is that they come with the emotions attached, not like the inaccessible frustration of a forgotten math problem. Kanye's graduation reminds me of a time when I had just gotten a driver's license. I was about to graduate high school. I was experiencing an independence like I had never known. Coloring Book came out at a time when I was just starting to hit my stride, running sound for a band, after moving back home to take care of my mother. It calls to mind ambition, hope, and the excitement that comes from getting paid to do what you love. And Wild Heart reminds me of sitting at that counter eating tacos. But more importantly, it reminds me of getting to know someone new, waking up in the morning, and having the whole summer ahead of you. It reminds me of falling in love. If you ask me how many times I've seen my favorite TV show all the way through, I'd say probably about 10 times. My favorite movie, maybe 5 or 6. Favorite book, 3. Now, this says a lot about me, but I'm not sure it's too far off for most people. If you ask me how many times I've heard my favorite album, if I could even pick one, I'd have to say in the hundreds. Favorite song, probably in the thousands. Music is a unique art form for just this reason. We all know that music, particularly pop music, is inherently repetitive. Verse, chorus, verse, chorus. But even the way we listen to music is repetitive. If I asked you, when was the last time you finished a book and you loved it so much, you flipped back to page 1 and immediately started over again? Or a movie? My guess is that's probably never happened to you. But this idea is built into the way we listen to music. If you listen to a tape all the way through, you pop it out, you flip it over, you listen to the other side, pop it out again, flip it back over, and you're at the beginning. Side A rewinds while side B plays. And once we got CD players, this functionality became a button so that we could press play once and listen to the same album or even song all day. And when we made the switch to iPods and streaming apps, that function had become so ingrained in the way we listen to music, it's hard to imagine an interface without it. Repetition is so fundamental to music, you could take something with no recognizable musicality, no harmony, no discernible melody, and turn it into music just with repetition. When I was a kid, I remember seeing Little Shop of Horrors loads of times. Last spring, I watched it for the first time in 15, maybe 20 years. I didn't remember every joke and I had some trouble with the lyrics, but the music came back to me with no problem. I remember just about every note, every chord change, every unexpected twist in the music. I had a similar experience in college with the song Monsters by Matchbook Romance. I heard it for the first time in probably 5 years, but I still knew every note of the guitar solo. And in writing this, I listened back for the first time since then. Still got every note. Now I have a special relationship with music. I started trumpet in the 4th grade, and I've been a musician ever since, at least in some capacity. I've played in bands, I've studied theory, and I've written music professionally. So it shouldn't be a surprise that I could hold on to musical ideas for years, maybe even decades. But my experience can't be that unique. I'm sure we've all met plenty of non-musicians who know every word to every Disney song they've ever heard. Because of its relationship with repetition, both in how it's created and how it's consumed, music will always be an art form predisposed to memory development. And if you know me, you know that I also have a special relationship with memory and the science involved. My mother passed away at age 56 after suffering with Lewy body dementia for several years. As such, I know how intrinsically a person's memory is tied to their identity. As I cared for my mother and her memory deteriorated, she became less and less recognizable as herself. Without memories of her childhood, career, marriages, and children, she became someone new, not my mother as I always knew her. Oliver Sacks, a neurologist known for studying abnormal psychological and neurological phenomena, wrote a book called Musicophilia detailing some extreme cases involving music in the brain. He dedicated a chapter to dementia patients and how music could be used to improve not only memory, but also overall mental health, even after the music stopped playing. Sacks describes a patient much like my mother, still clinging on to old habits like carrying a newspaper around, but unaware of their place in time and space. A patient who had trouble recognizing his own children, he was able to sing along beautifully with recordings of his old a cappella group. But Sacks doesn't only observe memory recall from music. He notices a shift in demeanor in the patient's expression. If you've ever interacted with someone with dementia, you'll probably notice that one of the more disturbing changes is a loss of emotional empathy. I remember one day coming home from work mid-panic attack when my mother was still alive. I've had panic attacks since adolescence, and my mother was always my go-to emergency therapist. But in this moment, as I was crying and gasping for breath in the living room, my mother just sat on the couch, blankly smiling, unable to interpret and respond to the emotions being expressed in front of her. Even in getting my mother to recall a pre-dementia memory, there was a lack of emotionality. She may claim to remember living in a different town years ago, but there was no emotional memory attached to it. Sacks notes that the case I already discussed may not be entirely convincing since the patient was musically trained. Would we see the same thing with an athlete with dementia? In fact, the patient he studies was a talented tennis player, even with dementia. But Sacks was able to find plenty of evidence that music could be an effective memory aid even for non-musicians with dementia. He describes rooms of patients who have no idea what day it is, but all join together in a sing-along when their caretaker puts on a recognizable tune. As Sacks puts it, most patients with dementia are not specially gifted in music, and yet, almost without exception, they retain their musical powers and tastes, even when most other mental powers have been severely compromised. I found Sacks' observation to be inspiring, almost too good to be true. I remember reading this chapter at work and being anxious to go home and play my mother her favorite music, which I got to do eventually. My mother was no musician, but she loved to sing and hum. She had a vast love of music and encouraged me to pursue it both as a passion and even as a career. She is the reason I'm a musician today. So much of my musical taste has been shaped by my mother. I love country music because of her. I love women musicians because of her. I love songs that tell stories because of her. And of course I knew what she liked. I was able to find 2 CDs readily that might have brought something back. I played through a few Simon and Garfunkel tracks. They all seemed to stir something in her, but there was no reason to believe she actually recognized the music. There were times when she didn't even recognize me. I tried again with some Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. I played what is perhaps their most well-known song, Our House. If you don't recognize it by name, you might know it by the chorus, and you share that in common with my mother. For every song I played, I asked my mother if she recognized it about 30 seconds in. Sometimes she gave a yes, but it was always lukewarm. For this song, I asked her again. At first she said no, but then the chorus kicked in, and she said to me, "Now that I hear it, yeah. I never get the verse things." For the rest of my experiment, my mother didn't sing along. She didn't know every note. She was able to hum at parts, but never for very long and not always accurately. I didn't get my Oliver Sacks aha moment, but my experiment wasn't a failure. My mother didn't know where she was. At times she didn't know who I was, or even who her own husband was. She had trouble recalling my sisters who lived out of state. She couldn't talk about literature or movies or current events. But for one moment, because of the music that my mother and I shared, she was able to form a single coherent thought. Perhaps the last real abstract idea that my mother has ever said to me. And for that, I will always be thankful. To music for its power to create memory, and to my mother for giving me the gift of music.
Subscribe, like, comment. Subscribe, like, comment. Subscribe, like.
yes with repetition. Yes with repetition. Yes with repetition.